You're listening to Bad Girlfriend Radio. I'm your host, Bree Schmidt. I'm a relationship coach and educator offering advice and insight that is no shame, no sugarcoat, and no BS. Today, I'm talking about what to do when you disagree on important issues with a partner or with other loved ones in your life. I'll talk about how to navigate having different political and social stances, how to maintain a relationship when you have different opinions, and even when to end a relationship over these differences. So stick around to hear more of this discussion. Do you enjoy listening to Bad Girlfriend Radio, but what you really want is a chance to talk one-on-one about dating and relationships? If you are ready to start thriving in dating and your love life, I am here to coach you in personalized coaching sessions that are all about you, and all you need is an internet connection. I offer coaching through private video calls as well as through email, and you can book your first consultation call with me for free if you just head over to breeschmidt.com and tap Work With Me, or you can find the link over in this episode's show description. We'll get deep into the thought patterns and limiting beliefs that are holding you back, and you'll learn how to shift your mindset to gain confidence and empower yourself to live as your highest, best bad girlfriend self in your love life. I'll give you action steps, worksheets, and resources to keep you engaged in growth throughout the whole process. And all of this is tailor-made for you and your needs and your goals. And hey, it doesn't matter if you're single or in a relationship or married. This is about you showing up the way that you want to, no matter your relationship status. Whether you are looking to start dating with confidence, heal through your breakup, or stop fighting with your partner, I am here to work with you. So go to breeschmidt.com and tap Work With Me, or go find the link in this episode's show description. Now, on to today's discussion. What to do when you disagree on politics, social issues, and more. It's probably no surprise that this topic was inspired by what has been unfolding lately in the US. And, a lot of our beliefs about, a lot of things come from somewhere or something else. And race and racism are no exception. Our environment can really shape us and shape what we believe. And the people in our environment can really shape and influence us too. So it makes sense, especially in a time like right now where there's a lot of work and a lot of protesting being done for Black Lives Matter, that you may want to distance yourself from those who don't agree with you. And I do think that managing your environment and the people around you is a form of self-care. But what if someone who you really care about just can't see eye to eye with you? What if your partner doesn't see eye to eye with you? Should you just, dump them and be on your merry way because you're not in agreement? It's not always that easy, and your love for them might outweigh those differences. So then how do you deal? How do you deal with those differences? So that's what I'll be talking about today. And I don't want to take any attention away from the racial injustices that are being discussed right now. I think staying focused on efforts against racism and police brutality and violence towards Black lives is very necessary right now. But those issues don't exist in a vacuum, and there is a whole political spectrum and a lot of other causes that you may not agree with a partner or another loved one about too. So this discussion today isn't about one particular issue necessarily, but it's about how to deal with any of these disagreements in your relationship, whether it's about racism or anything else. So whether it's related to racism, immigration, political parties, or women's rights, whatever you're passionate about, if your partner or a loved one just doesn't get it, they can't agree with you, then chances are that you will find this extremely frustrating. You might start to judge them. You'll start to think that they're ignorant, or that they're brainwashed, or that they're selfish. And these judgments are really just criticisms about the other person. And if you've listened to my other episode about criticism and defensiveness, episode 23, then you know that criticizing someone else can just become an invitation for explosive arguments that are hardly ever productive. These criticisms aren't actually about the belief or the opinion anymore. It becomes about the person. it's not that the belief is wrong. I mean, maybe in some cases, maybe the other person actually does believe something that has been found to be fake news, right? So maybe in that case, you could actually safely say that the belief itself is flawed. But it starts to become less about the belief being wrong, and it becomes about the person being wrong. That person is stupid. That person is selfish. That person is weak. Whatever thoughts may come up, these judgments about the other person are toxic. So it's no wonder that political debates at family reunions can get so ugly, right? So the truth is, behind these political or social beliefs, there is a person. There is a human being. And humans are complex. By listening to someone say why they support Trump and then just saying like, wow, you're an idiot, and leaving it at that, you're simplifying that person and their experiences. And absolutely the same thing is happening right now to people who are protesting about racial injustice. Some people, they just see people protesting, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently, and they think, what a bunch of idiots. They're burning down their own shops, they're burning down their own stores that they shop at in their neighborhood. They're so stupid. That oversimplification is really easy for our brains to comprehend. And our brain likes things to be simple, Our brains like to make assumptions. Our brains like to try to put things in perfect little boxes. But the reality is that people are much more complex than this, and people's behaviors are much more complex than that too. The reality is that people choose to support Trump for some reasons that make sense to them and their experiences and what they've learned. The people who are protesting and rioting in some cases are doing so because of a whole history of negative experiences against them. Those simple judgments that we might make that, they're stupid, they're brainwashed, they're crazy, those judgments take away from seeing the complex humanity in each other. And trust me, I've been guilty of this myself. Honestly, I can get very attached to my own beliefs and opinions, and I feel like if I've given some kind of cause enough thought, then my thoughts about it must be right. And then other people are wrong. If you disagree with me, you're wrong. So if that sounds like you too, then together, let's work to just stop trying to be right. Stop trying to prove the other person wrong. So then what should you do? So when dealing with a partner or a family member or whoever you're in disagreement with over a political or a social issue, approach these conversations with equal parts asking questions and equal parts explaining your stance and explaining why your stance is important to you. So 50% asking questions to learn more about their perspective, and then 50% explaining yours. But nowhere in there are you explaining to them why they're wrong and why you're right. It is not about that. It is not about being right. It's about seeing the human behind the opinion, and also to help them to get to know the human behind your opinion too. So when you're asking questions, aim to learn more about their background and where they're from and how those things might be influencing the belief that they have now. Learn how they came to see these conclusions rather than like the details of their beliefs. So, for example, if they're against abortion, then ask questions about how they learned about abortion, what personal experiences they might have with abortion or choosing against abortion, Some women, they might say that they're against abortion because they've had a child and they couldn't imagine having terminated that pregnancy. Then you might be tempted to ask, okay, yeah, but what if you had an abusive partner, or you didn't have the money to support the child, or what if you were sexually assaulted? Which, by the way, these are all very important questions to ask in conversations about abortion. But these questions are more details-based about the specifics of their beliefs. And these types of questions are really great for debating. But once you start debating with your partner or whoever, it'll likely turn into a you against them fight. It's not helping for understanding at that point. It's just becoming a debate and a fight and an argument. So keep your questions focused on their personal experiences or how they learned what they know about that topic. Keep it human. Aim to understand the human. So then you might be thinking, okay, so I'm supposed to just ask them questions to understand why they think what they think, and I'm supposed to just sit there and go along with it even if I completely disagree. And to that, I'm here to tell you, no. This is the other 50% where you can explain your perspective. Again, this isn't really about the details or coming up with a good argument for why you're right. Instead, talk about how you have been personally impacted by this certain cause or issue. How does it fit into your life and your experiences? So when it comes to abortion then, just using that again as an example, you could explain that maybe you watched a friend make the difficult decision to have an abortion and you saw how truly having an abortion was the best option for her, and that if you were in that situation, you would also want to have that option. Will this convince the other person that you're right? No, maybe not, but that's not the point. If you're in a relationship with someone who just doesn't agree with you, it's more important for you to understand each other's humanity than just listing a bunch of facts or hypothetical questions to try to get them to change their mind. And if you really care about the cause that you're discussing, I really am asking you to prioritize the humanity, because the more that you try to argue, you try to convince someone that they're wrong, the more defensive that they're going to get. And chances are you're actually going to make less progress. And I want to make it clear that I am speaking right now about interpersonal relationships. I am talking about the relationship that you have with your partner or your mother or someone else who is close to you. I'm not talking about educational sources or organizations. So what I'm saying is basically the facts are important. The details are important. So posting something on social media with some statistic or watching a documentary where they talk about, the history of a certain movement or whatever it might be, those are really valuable sources of information. So this podcast is obviously not aimed to those, people who produce those documentaries or who post information online, because education is obviously important. But what I'm saying is, in your relationship with your significant other, what is most important is that you actually educate each other about yourselves first. Educate each other on your own backgrounds and your own narratives, not information that you can find in a book. Trust me, that book is valuable. But if you're really trying to work on your relationship with someone close to you and help them to understand you, throwing a book at them is probably not going to be the most productive option, okay? So once you start trying to lecture and teach and correct the other person, you're not really treating them like your partner anymore, So in these conversations, spend 50% of your time asking questions about their perspective and their background, and then 50% on yours and your own experiences and why this stance is important to you personally. And back on the note of education for a moment, I wanted to mention that it is okay to ask the other person, ask your partner or other loved one if you can maybe, send them a link to an article about that topic, or if you can recommend a book or a documentary to give them more information on your perspective. That is actually okay. So here's what I mean. Let's use the abortion example again. So you realize that your friend or your partner, whoever it is, let's say it's your partner for this. So you realize that they are actually pro-life and anti-abortion, while you are pro-choice. So you ask some questions about why they came to that opinion and what it means to them personally. And then they tell you that it's about their religious background and how they grew up always hearing in their church that abortion was sinful. So then this kind of influences how they feel about abortion now, because they still want to follow their faith and they want to avoid, sinful acts. And you don't want to make any effort to try to change their mind, right? But you explain that other 50% where you explain yourself, you explain your personal experiences and thoughts too, about how you helped your friend through choosing to have an abortion and how you can relate to your friend, and you would want that option for yourself in the future. You might explain that you fear that you would be an unhappy parent if you had a child too soon, for example, and that you always use protection, but what if that were to fail? You would want to have other options other than going through with giving birth. This is all just an example, by the way. But then at that point, you've both shared your own personal backgrounds and experiences with abortion and how that affects you personally. But maybe you get the impression that your partner just still doesn't actually know much about abortion or whatever the topic is. Maybe they said something that you know is actually, factually inaccurate. So then at that point, so far you've kept it positive. There's been no criticism or defensiveness. You're not criticizing them and calling them stupid, But you could suggest they watch a certain documentary, or you could ask if it's okay if you send a link to some other information or resources to help educate them. There's a couple reasons why this approach is more likely to be effective than if you just repeat all the information that you read in a book or that you saw in a documentary. So for one thing, it gives them space and privacy to explore more about that topic on their own. So if you just send them some resources to take in their own private time, they're less likely to be defensive because they don't need to respond immediately to you in a conversation, right? Like they can just read that article or book or whatever on their own privately and have that time to digest it on their own. Then they may choose to discuss it later if they wish, right? And also, it can be easier to trust a professional source on a topic rather than someone who just supports it. So if your partner tries to give some kind of medical advice, you might not really trust them, but if a doctor tells you the same advice, you're probably more likely to listen. And I'm not saying that media and organizations aren't biased, but if an organization can give very accurate and specific details and statistics while you might try to just explain like the gist of it to your partner, honestly, you probably won't sound as convincing. So please feel free to share educational resources with your partner or loved ones. But if you want them to be the most receptive to it, ask for their permission before sending that link or giving that recommendation, and really take the pressure off. Don't tell them like, you should really watch this, just keep it really light. Take the pressure off and give them that option and that privacy to think about it more on their own. Now, so far I've talked about how to discuss a disagreement and how to gently help the other person to perhaps learn more about your stance. Okay, but what if you've been deeply affected by a certain issue, so much so that you just cannot tolerate someone who doesn't understand it? Or what if you're having these kind of conversations, but even as you avoid criticizing the other person or trying to be right, they are still getting all defensive and combative and you're just getting tired of it? So there are certainly some cases where you don't have to agree to disagree. Not every difference can be managed, and that's okay. If you're really passionate about something, or if you've experienced a personal trauma related to a certain topic or a certain cause, and you need a partner who gets that, that is okay. You don't need to bury your authentic feelings and experiences just to keep the peace. You don't need to quiet that part of yourself just to maintain harmony. Listen, relationships are not about peace and harmony. Relationships are about being two entirely different people with unique experiences and opinions and being able to honor and respect both. You do not need to bury who you are for someone else. So if you don't want to date someone because they don't agree with you about a certain social issue or political issue, you know what? That is okay. If someone gets defensive and lacks compassion when you try to open up about your perspective time and time again, and you don't want to continue a relationship with them, that's okay. For couples to deal with these differences, both people need to be able to be open and compassionate, not combative and judgmental. And on the topic of compassion, I had a conversation with my husband pretty recently about compassion within our own relationship, and it's a really important quality to have in any relationship. But for us, we are from extremely different backgrounds, different countries, different cultures, different social classes, everything. And, currently I live in his country And in the future, he will probably live in my home country. So compassion is required to support the other person who may sometimes feel like a fish out of water. That's me. I'm the fish, okay? So I was talking to my husband about compassion and how it's not really about putting yourself in their shoes. It goes beyond that. It's about recognizing that their shoes are different. And the view from their shoes is different from the view that you see when you're standing in your own shoes. So it is not as simple as, well, if I was in that position, if I was in their shoes, then I would do this or I would feel this way. It's actually not about that. It's about realizing that that person in their shoes might do something or feel something that you can't even imagine. You can't really see what they see. Even if you try, you can't fully grasp what their view is like. So you aren't in a position to judge how they act or how they feel. And even if you put on their shoes for a moment, you still might not see what they would see. They have lived a whole life. They've had a whole life that they've witnessed from their own eyes. And there is no way that you can possibly understand what it feels like to have lived all the years that they've lived in their shoes. So compassion goes beyond putting yourself in their shoes. It's realizing that you're not in their shoes. You've never really been in their shoes. And even if you can relate to something that they've experienced, you can't see everything that they can see from where they're standing in their shoes. Even if someone's opinion doesn't make any sense to you, compassion is recognizing that to them, it absolutely does. And what they see is just as real as what you see. This is especially true right now with some of the judgments that I hear in response to Black Lives Matter and the protests that have been happening. So I just wanted to touch on that for a second. So it is imperative that there is compassion in your relationship. So let's say then that in your relationship there is compassion. This disagreement that's happening isn't actually a deal breaker for you, and you're able to understand each other's personal reasons behind the opinions that you have, okay? So you can talk about your differences without fighting about it, and overall, you want to continue your relationship despite your differences. But still, you find yourself getting frustrated. One simple thing that can help is to just set some boundaries around your differences. Remember how I said to ask for permission before, you send a link to some article or you encourage them to watch that documentary? So it's important to give each other space to have different opinions and not pressure the other person to agree with you. So if one person is politically conservative and the other isn't, then, consume your news separately. Don't turn on a news channel on the TV that is known for being either conservative or liberal. Or if one person is vegetarian, then respect their wishes to not eat at a steakhouse together, for example. And one last point for managing disagreements in your relationship, find your similarities. It doesn't mean that you need to ignore your differences entirely, but you care about that person, so focus on why you do. Put your attention on your similarities and where there is overlap in your beliefs. My husband still cannot embrace the F word, and I mean feminism, that F word. It's kind of sad to say that I'm not even really surprised because a lot of men still resist calling themselves feminists. Probably because the word itself sounds feminine. It doesn't sound masculine. It is obviously connected to women and women's rights. So a lot of men reject that word. And occasionally I will talk with my husband about why feminism is for everyone. And that even though it does focus mostly on women's rights, women's rights are actually important to society in general. Women's rights are human rights. And I tell him that these issues directly affect me, but still, he just won't call himself a feminist. Now, if he was actually anti-feminism or fighting for men's rights or something, or if he had really traditional ideas for gender roles and relationships, then honestly, I couldn't be with him. I couldn't do it. For me, that would definitely be a deal breaker. And that would be a difference that I would just get way too exhausted with trying to manage. But actually, on these topics, we're really in agreement completely. So he basically has all of the beliefs of a feminist, but he just doesn't like the word. So rather than focusing too narrowly on that fact that he doesn't want to call himself a feminist, I focus on the similarities. I focus on the values that we share, which, like I said, by most definitions would actually make him a feminist. But, I guess just don't tell him that. So focus on what you have in common. Even if it's, let's say that you are on opposite ends of the political spectrum. But the reason that you are on one side is because you care about freedom. You care about people's freedom and their rights. And then your partner is on the other end, and their reasoning is also because they care about people's freedom and their rights. Actually, you do share that value, but how you view it might be different. What you think the solution might be, or how you choose to approach that value or that issue is different, but you actually do share that value. You both deeply care about that value. So look for those commonalities and give that more of your attention than your differences. Assuming, like I said, that the differences aren't a complete deal breaker for you. If they are, then that is okay. You don't need to maintain that relationship. That is fine. All right, that wraps it up for this discussion today. But if you have any thoughts you want to share, let me know. You can DM me on Instagram. I'm at Bree_Schmidt. Or you can email me at contact@breeschmidt.com. Thanks for listening as always. Until next time.